Before we get into tonight's conversation, we want to remind listeners that the opinions expressed on Data and Dissonance are exactly that, opinions. They come from different perspectives, different life experiences, and sometimes very different worldviews. The goal of this show isn't to tell you what to think, it's to challenge how you think. Some of what you hear tonight might resonate with you, some of it might frustrate you, and some of it might make you stop and reconsider things you thought were settled. That's kind of the point. Real conversations aren't always comfortable, but they are necessary. So take what you hear, think about it, question it, talk about it with the people around you. And most importantly, don't let anyone convince you that thinking for yourself is somehow dangerous. Now let's get into it.
There's something strange happening in America right now, and most people feel it even if they can't quite explain it. We have more ways to connect with each other than at any other point in human history. We carry devices in our pockets that can instantly reach thousands of people. We can video chat across the planet. And social media promises that we're always just a message away from someone. And yet at the same time, surveys show that Americans are reporting higher levels of loneliness than ever before. People are surrounded by notifications, followers, and digital conversations, but somehow still feel like they're sitting alone at the table. Think about how different life used to look even 20 years ago. Communities were built around neighborhoods, churches, bowling leagues, little league teams, and workplaces where people actually knew the folks they spent their days with. Now we have remote work, dating apps, endless scrolling, and digital communities where people can spend hours interacting with strangers while never speaking to the neighbor next door. Technology promised to bring people closer together, but in many ways it might be quietly pulling us further apart. So tonight we're asking a big question. Are we living in what some people are calling the loneliness economy? A world where entire industries, from social media to streaming services to delivery apps, are built around people living more isolated lives. Are we actually becoming more disconnected even as technology tells us we're more connected than ever? All right, let's bring in the crew. Brian is here tonight bringing the MAGA fire energy, the guy who looks at modern culture and usually says we traded real life for a phone screen and a dopamine hit. Rachel joins us as always, bringing the independent lens, cutting through both political spin and cultural nonsense to look at what's actually happening in everyday American life. Daniel is here with the conspiracy board fully assembled, the man who believes if you follow the incentives long enough, you'll find the people who benefit from the chaos. And of course, Skylar is with us tonight, bringing the progressive perspective, challenging the panel, and pushing the conversation toward how economic pressure, housing costs, and modern work life are shaping the way people actually live. All right, let's get into tonight's topic. If you look at the data over the last decade, something really interesting pops up. Americans report having fewer close friendships than they used to. Fewer people say they have someone they can call in a crisis. Participation in community groups, civic clubs, and even religious organizations has declined dramatically. At the same time, our lives have become more digital, more remote, and more individual. Food shows up at the door, work happens on a laptop, entertainment streams directly into the living room, and entire friendships can exist inside a phone. Rachel, let me start with you tonight. When people talk about this idea of a loneliness economy, are we actually watching a real social shift happen in America? Or is this just nostalgia for a past that wasn't quite as perfect as people remember it?
I think there's definitely a little nostalgia mixed into the conversation because every generation tends to romanticize the past. But at the same time, the data around loneliness is very real. And it's not just about feelings, it's about measurable social change. People genuinely have fewer close relationships than they did even 20 years ago. Communities that used to naturally create social interaction, church groups, bowling leagues, neighborhood gatherings, even office environments, have shrunk dramatically or disappeared altogether. What's replaced them is a digital version of social life that feels active, but often lacks depth. Part of the issue is that technology offers connection without commitment. You can scroll through hundreds of posts, send quick messages, react with emojis, and feel like you're participating in social life without actually building meaningful relationships. But humans still need real interaction, real presence, real shared experiences. When those things disappear, people often don't realize how much they've lost until they start feeling isolated. And what makes it even harder is that the modern world quietly rewards isolation. Everything from food delivery to streaming entertainment is designed so you never actually have to leave the house.
That point about technology offering connection without commitment is really interesting because, in a lot of ways, it's almost like we've engineered convenience into every part of our lives, but maybe at the cost of community. It's easier than ever to live your entire day without talking to another human being face to face. Work from home, groceries delivered, entertainment streamed, conversations happening through screens instead of across a table. Brian, when you look at this trend, do you think this is mostly a cultural shift driven by technology? Or do you think something deeper has changed in the way Americans build community? Brian responds.
I think technology definitely accelerated the problem, but the cultural shift started before the smartphones showed up. For decades, we've been moving away from institutions that used to create natural community. Family dinners, churches, local clubs, neighborhood involvement, even just knowing the people who live next door. A lot of that got replaced with this idea that personal freedom means total independence. And while independence sounds great, humans aren't wired to live completely isolated lives. We need tribes, communities, shared spaces. The irony is that the tools that were supposed to bring people together often end up replacing real interaction instead of enhancing it. Social media lets you maintain hundreds of weak connections, but it rarely builds the kind of relationships that actually support people when life gets difficult. And when you combine that with a culture that tells people success means focusing entirely on your own life, your own career, your own goals, you end up with millions of people living parallel lives without much real community holding them together.
That's an interesting way to look at it, almost like we traded tight knit communities for convenience and independence. But Daniel, I can already see you over there scribbling something on the conspiracy board. Whenever there's a massive cultural shift like this, you always ask the question, who benefits? So when we talk about a loneliness economy, who do you think is actually profiting from Americans becoming more isolated?
If you step back and look at the incentives, the pattern becomes pretty obvious. Entire industries make more money when people live more individual, isolated lives. Streaming services thrive when entertainment replaces social activity. Food delivery apps thrive when people stop cooking together or going out to restaurants with friends. Social media platforms thrive when people substitute digital interaction for real-world relationships because every minute spent scrolling generates advertising revenue. Loneliness isn't just a psychological condition anymore. It's become an economic model. The more time people spend alone, the more they consume individually. And once companies realize that isolation increases engagement with their products, there's very little incentive to design systems that encourage people to log off and spend time together in the real world. That doesn't mean there's some secret meeting where executives decided to make society lonely, but the system absolutely rewards behaviors that keep people glued to screens rather than building real communities.
That idea that loneliness can actually become profitable is a little unsettling when you think about it. If the system rewards isolation, it makes you wonder whether the trend continues unless something changes culturally or economically. Skylar, let me bring you in here. From your perspective, how much of this loneliness conversation is about technology and culture, and how much of it is actually about economic pressure, housing costs, and modern work life making it harder for people to build community?
I think economics play a much bigger role than people sometimes realize. When housing costs rise, people move more frequently, which makes it harder to build stable communities. When work hours become unpredictable or people juggle multiple jobs, they have less time to invest in friendships, neighborhood events, or social organizations. And when entire generations struggle with financial instability, things like joining clubs, attending events, or even going out with friends can start to feel like luxuries instead of normal parts of life. Technology certainly amplifies isolation, but economic structures can quietly reinforce it as well. When society prioritizes productivity above all else, social relationships become secondary. And yet, those relationships are exactly what help people maintain emotional stability and resilience. So, if we want to talk about solving loneliness, we probably need to look at both sides of the equation: the cultural shift toward digital life and the economic pressures that make real world community harder to sustain.
Skylar makes a point there that people on the right and left probably don't like admitting for different reasons, and that's this. Loneliness is not always just some emotional or cultural problem. Sometimes it's structural. If people are constantly moving because rent keeps going up, if they're working crazy hours just to stay afloat, if they're exhausted all the time and every part of life feels expensive, then yeah, of course, community starts to break down. It gets a lot harder to go build friendships, go join something, go be present in your town or neighborhood when your entire life starts feeling like one long survival drill. And I think that's where this conversation gets bigger than just phones are bad or social media is ruining us. Because while those things clearly play a role, there's also a deeper reality here. Modern life has been engineered for efficiency, not for belonging. And maybe that's the real heart of tonight's conversation. We built a world where almost everything is easier, faster, and more convenient, but not necessarily more meaningful. You can order dinner without seeing a waiter, work a full shift without seeing a coworker, watch endless entertainment without leaving your couch, and keep in touch with 50 people without having one real conversation. That's not just a tech issue, that's a cultural and economic shift that is slowly teaching people how to live around each other instead of with each other. And the scary part is, once that becomes normal, people stop asking whether something essential has been lost. So maybe the real question is not whether America is lonely. I think on some level we already know that it is. The real question is whether we're willing to rebuild the habits, spaces, and priorities that actually make people feel connected again. Because if community dies, everything else starts weakening too. Trust, empathy, resilience, even the ability to disagree without hating each other. And when that happens, you don't just get a lonely country, you get a fractured one.
Before we wrap up tonight's conversation, quick reminder for everyone listening that you can support the show and represent the Data and Dissonance community by checking out our merch store. We've got everything from hoodies and hats to mugs, tumblers, and the coffee blends that keep this crew running. Whether you're sipping the High Lakes Light Roast, the Rock Creek Medium Roast, or the bold Bitterroot Dark Roast, every purchase helps keep independent conversations like this going. You can find the full lineup at the Data and Dissonance merch store online.
Tonight's conversation hits on something deeper than politics, economics, or even technology. It touches on something fundamental about what it means to be human. For thousands of years, people survived and thrived because they lived in communities. Families lived close together. Neighbors knew each other. Towns gathered for events, celebrations, and even disagreements that happened face to face instead of behind a screen. Somewhere along the way, convenience started replacing connection. We gained efficiency, speed, and access to information the world has never seen before, but we might have quietly traded away something just as important. The challenge going forward isn't rejecting technology or pretending the modern world doesn't exist. The real challenge is remembering that behind every screen is still a human being who needs real relationships, real conversation, and real community. Maybe the solution isn't something governments or companies can fix. Maybe it starts with small choices: calling a friend instead of texting, talking to the neighbor instead of scrolling, showing up somewhere in person instead of watching life through a screen. Because in the end, connection isn't something that gets delivered like a package. It's something we build together. And with that, we'll leave you with this thought tonight. Remember to speak truth. Stir thought.
Tonight's episode of Data and Dissonance is brought to you by the Caleb Rourke Thriller series, the action-packed political thriller novels written by our own host, Artie Roy. If you enjoy the conversations we have on this show about power, truth, corruption, global tension, and the unseen forces shaping the modern world, then the Caleb Rourke series takes those same themes and drops them into a fast-moving cinematic story where the stakes couldn't be higher. The books follow Caleb Rourke, a former intelligence operator pulled into a shadow war unfolding behind the headlines, where secret networks, powerful interests, and hidden agendas collide with the fight for truth and freedom. The series begins with The Covenant Protocol, where Rourke first discovers a global conspiracy operating beneath the surface of international politics and intelligence agencies. What starts as a mission quickly spirals into a dangerous revelation that powerful players are manipulating events far beyond public view. The second installment, The Prophet Directive, raises the tension even higher as Caleb uncovers deeper layers of deception, forcing him to confront the reality that the institutions people trust the most may be hiding the darkest secrets of all. And now the third installment, Black Echo Rising, is officially out and available. This chapter pushes the story to a whole new level as the battle between truth and control spreads across global power centers. forcing Caleb and his allies into a race against time to expose a threat capable of reshaping the balance of power itself. If you enjoy stories filled with espionage, geopolitical tension, and characters navigating a world where nothing is what it seems, the Caleb Rourke thriller series delivers exactly that kind of edge-of-your-seat experience. But the creative world behind Data and Dissonance doesn't stop with books. The show is also supported by the music coming out of the same creative universe. If you enjoy patriotic country with a message, you can check out the album Four Wheelers and Hallelujah, available now on Spotify and major streaming platforms. That record leans into country storytelling and American roots, with songs about faith, family, freedom, and the everyday people who keep this country running. Tracks like Stand Tall Charlie capture that spirit of resilience and pride that runs through both the music and the conversations we have here on the show. But the music journey started earlier with the album Uncaged, which carries a very different tone. That record leans much more into a grunge-inspired sound, influenced by bands like Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains. Many of those songs were written during a much darker chapter of life and reflect real experiences with addiction, personal struggles, and the long shadows left behind by time spent in war overseas. It's raw, emotional music about confronting pain, fighting through the demons that follow you home, and learning how to keep moving forward even when those battles never fully disappear. In many ways, Uncaged represents the personal side of the story, while Four Wheelers and Hallelujah reflects the rebuilding, the faith, and the pride in country that comes after surviving those storms. So if you want to support the work behind Data and Dissonance, check out the Caleb Rourke thriller series on Amazon and stream the albums Uncaged and Four Wheelers and Hallelujah wherever you listen to music. Every listen, every read, and every share helps keep independent voices and independent stories alive.